All right. Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Briones Society Discussion Series. The Briones Society is a club founded by members of the San Francisco Republican Party. We provide a forum for center-right conservatives, independents, and moderates to connect, share ideas, engage in the political process. We believe in civility and discourse and consensus politics. And more than anything, we believe that there is an unheard and underserved moderate majority in San Francisco. And we want to give a voice to that moderate majority. If you're interested in learning more, please follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Briones Society, all one word. Or email us at brionesociety@gmail.com, and we can add you to our mailing list. My name is Jay Dondy. I'm one of the co-founders of the Briones Society, and I am joined today by Stephen Martin-Pinto, a fifth-generation San Franciscan, Marine Corps veteran and reservist, firefighter with the San Francisco Fire Department, and former member of a Hotshot crew with the Bureau of Land Management. And if that's not enough, he's also, among other things, former president of the Sunnyside Neighborhood Association.
That's right.
Currently the secretary of West of Twin Peaks Central Council and vice president and commissioner on the San Francisco Veterans Affairs Commission.
That's right.
I can't think of a better guest to help kick off this discussion series. So Stephen, welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to talk today about what it's been like to be a firefighter in California over the last few very active fire seasons. I want to talk about, what we can do going forward to help mitigate the effects of some of these devastating fires, or prevent them from occurring in the first place. But I want to kind of start by getting to know you a little bit better, because I have to say that's a pretty impressive resume. So just to kick things off, could you tell us a little bit about how you found your way to becoming a firefighter? I think it started in the military?
Kind of, actually. So when I was in college, I went to UC Davis. I was, I think I always kind of knew I wanted to be a firefighter. I just didn't really know how to do it, or didn't even think that I could do it, because it just seemed like such a like a job that was just so far from my capability. But when I was in college, they had this thing called Davis Fire Crew. It was a hand crew that for college students to go be a hand crew.
And a hand crew is a unit of firefighters?
Yeah. It's about 20 or so people who work to help build fire line, to contain the fire, to do mop up, which is where you put the little smokes out after fires kind of burn through. And it's and that's kind of how I got my introduction to firefighting. And so there was an announcement, when I was in college to be a part of Davis Fire Crew. And so I signed up, I joined, and we went on our first fire assignment, which was somewhere near Willows in California, Northern California. And I was hooked.
Okay.
I was hooked right from the start. I loved it, being outdoors, camping, and making some pretty good money for me as a college student. That was pretty good money. That was pretty good money. It's better than working in the cafeteria or being a janitor, which I did too.
Right.
But this is much better. And that's kind of, I guess, my first foray into firefighting. The next year, I applied for a job with the U.S. Forest Service as on an engine crew, and then from there it kind of just took off. I worked for Cal Fire afterwards, but then I always kind of wanted to be in the military as well, the Marine Corps, and 9/11 happened, and I kind of felt like, well, there's kids who are my age who are over there in Afghanistan and far across the world doing things, and I just kind of wanted to be a part of that. So I went down to my recruiter. I didn't know what to do, or I didn't know anything about the military at all. I didn't know what a sergeant was. I didn't know what a captain was, it was all just like, you know, I didn't know anything.
Right.
So I went down to my recruiter and I asked him, like, you know, I want to join the Marine Corps. That was the one I wanted to do because it was the most challenging. And, you know, I could have chosen the Air Force and or the Navy and got probably a better job, but
But you took the tough
for
route.
better conditions.
Right.
But I don't know. I just it's something I want to do. You know, so I went down to recruit. I talked to him. He went through all the various kinds of jobs that there were. And he talked about being motor T, motor transport, which is basically you drive trucks and 7 tons and flatbed pickups and all that stuff. And he said, that's a good job. You want to do that? I'm like, nah, okay, if you say so, you know? And then he talked about, he kind of went through and he hit upon aircraft firefighting. And he was like, well, you know, you could do that, you know, and he didn't really sell it that well.
Okay. But
I was like, I want to do that. You know, I want to do that. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's in your wheelhouse. You already had some experience with it.
Yeah. So I applied for that. I luckily, you know, was able to meet the requirements because, you know, ASVAB score, you have to have a certain ASVAB score to qualify for that.
That's like a psychometric test, like an IQ test sort of thing?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. It basically just, it kind of measures your like scholastic aptitude, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
So I met the requirement, and I did that for about 5.5, 6 years, and I was pretty fortunate. I got to kind of have both the Marine Corps experience and a firefighter experience too.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, kind of from there, I did that for you know, after that, I became an officer because I, you know, liked the Marine Corps enough. I wanted to go further in my career.
The food's better, probably, as an officer.
The food's still the crappy. The Air Force has the best food.
Okay.
Yeah. 4 meals a day at their chow halls.
Okay.
With cooks that take your trays away from you. You sit at the table, you can just leave it.
Gotta love it.
Yeah. Lowest bidder for the Marine Corps chow halls, and only 3 meals a day, 2 on weekends.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
Gotta make do.
but yeah, and then after I finished my initial tour as a enlisted, I said I want to go further. You know, I like the Marine Corps enough. I want to be an officer, and so I did that. And you know, I actually applied. You know, my friend had told me, this is back in 2009. I got out in 2009 as enlisted. She told me, you know, the SF Fire is hiring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why don't you put in for that? And I was like, okay, well, you know, I'll apply for that. And, you know, but whatever, you know, I don't really expect much out of it. So I applied for it. And then I went to OCS, Officer Candidate School.
Right.
And I didn't hear anything for about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And I just had kind of assumed in my mind that I applied for SF Fire and that was it.
Yeah.
You know, never to be heard from
it's
again.
A long time to wait for a job interview, 5 years.
Yeah. But then I was on my last year of my first enlistment as an officer.
Okay.
This is 2014. And I got an email from the Human Resources saying, we would like to schedule you for an interview for San Francisco Fire. Now, at this time, I was on deployment in Georgia.
The country, not the
country.
State. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They call themselves Sakartvelo. We call them Georgia. I don't know why. It's a whole other story. But I just love how we, like, you know, give people names against their will.
Right.
But I was coming home from that. I was about to come home from that. It was April 2014, and I was due to come home like a little bit later. And I applied back immediately. Said, yes, I'm interested. You know, I'm on deployment right now, but I will be back in a few weeks. You know, I'm interested. I want to continue along this process.
Mm-hmm.
So came back home in April, went through the whole hiring process, and I got a seat in the Fire Academy for San Francisco in August of 2014.
Cool.
And from there, the rest is history. Moved back home. I'm from here, born here, raised here. And it was kind of like coming back home to my hometown and, you know, having a job back here. And I knew that was it. Like, that was going to be the rest of my life. And I was okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I traveled around and I had done things I wanted to do. And I was like, okay, well, I'm 35 years old now, so I think it's time to settle down.
Settle down and fight fires.
Yeah. So that's kind of my foray. That's how it kind of happened in a nutshell.
I mean, that's really fascinating. I think that like the through line I see in all of that, and that I'm really impressed by, is just your sense of service, right? Like in each of these instances, it sounds like you had like something that you wanted to contribute back, and kind of a sense of calling. So I think that's very cool. I think that it's the case for most people. I can speak definitely for myself that we don't have any idea what a San Francisco firefighter does on a day-to-day basis, or how they're trained. I think my entire understanding of what work of a firefighter consists of, it comes from like the movie Backdraft, the Kurt Russell one, right? So I assume that that's probably not very realistic.
Check that door for heat.
Okay, exactly. Tell us a little bit about, just even starting with the fire academy, like what kind of training do you guys go through? And then after that, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis to be a firefighter in SF?
So our training was very, you start very basic, as if you don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us who got hired by the fire department, we already had some experience.
Okay.
But there were some people who it was almost like their first job. They never had didn't have much work experience before. Or if they did, it was maybe as like a checkout clerk at Safeway,
mm-hmm.
or working on an ambulance, or maybe in the trades, something like that. So you start out by kind of learning all the terminology, a little bit of fire science, like the fire tetrahedron. It used to be a triangle, now it's a tetrahedron.
I don't even know how many sides is that.
It's four
sided,
yeah, four sides.
Like a cube of
it's like a pyramid.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
With a triangle base, I guess. Yeah. They gotta like make everything complicated.
Right.
I would just say the four things that make fire.
Okay. What are the four things that make fire?
It's heat, oxygen, ignition source, and like a self-sustaining chemical reaction.
Okay, well, there you go. If the audience gets nothing out of this, they at least now know the four things that lead to a fire. So value delivered.
Yeah. So anyways, you start with that, then you kind of go into like your safety gear. Like this is your turnout gear, your clothes.
Mm-hmm.
This is your self-contained breathing apparatus. Then you have your, did I say fuel?
I don't.
Fuel, oxygen,
fuel, oxygen, and ignition.
Yeah. That's what I meant to say.
Okay, I got
it. Okay. Your SCBA, which is your self-contained breathing apparatus.
Okay. Like scuba, but not underwater, basically.
Above, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you kind of learn how to do that. You use that, and then you learn how to tie ropes and knots. You learn ladders, hoses, like, how did you pull the hose?
Yeah.
Stuff
like really basic stuff.
Basic stuff.
Yeah.
And then you get into more complicated stuff like, ventilation on a roof. So for example, if there is a fire in a building like this, there's a room and contents fire in here. The engine crew is going in to make that interior attack.
Mm.
It could be choked out with smoke and heat.
Okay.
Very hot, not ideal conditions to be in, even with your self-contained breathing apparatus and your clothes. And then what the ventilation crew does is they cut a hole in the roof to let all that smoke and heat out.
Oh, interesting.
And it kind of like cools down the environment.
Yeah,
with all the smoke, so now it's clearer. But you got to coordinate it correctly, because the con to that is it introduces more oxygen to the fire, so it could actually accelerate fire. But you have to have that hose crew, the engine crew, ideally placed to attack that fire like right then and there.
Okay.
So it becomes more complicated as you go towards the end of the academy.
Sure.
You also learn about hazardous materials, confined space, special rescue situations, like if there's a person that's fallen over a cliff at Land's End,
mm-hmm.
which we do a number of those kinds of rescues.
Right.
How do you tie the rope? How do you get what's called a litter, the Stokes basket, over the edge and send a rescue down to pick them up? And then a little bit of wildland stuff too. So it's all like that. It kind of ends on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and not to mention the medical aid stuff too. Like this is our protocols for treating medical patients.
Yeah, that's actually what I was really interested in. I mean, the other stuff is obviously fascinating, but I assume that, and maybe this is totally incorrect, a lot of the day-to-day work of a firefighter is sort of like EMT adjacent type
That's
work.
absolutely correct.
Okay.
And
yeah.
actually, I'd say about 80 to 90% of our calls
Mhm.
are what's called EMS, emergency medical service related
Right.
calls.
Right.
So, when I used to work here in this neighborhood, in the North Beach, Chinatown neighborhood, I was on the engine most of the time, and most of our calls were medical aids.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess that's a good thing, right? It's fewer fires.
Yeah.
Always
And
better.
the thing is, too, is a fire engine is more able to get to a patient quicker than an ambulance, because ambulances are roaming around the city all the time.
Right.
They're not really anywhere. They're not really assigned a certain location all the time. They're kind of roaming around.
Okay.
So, and then they transport the patient, take them back to the hospital, and so they're out of service.
Right.
So we can kind of provide that stopgap of medical care before the ambulance gets there.
Okay.
Yeah. But sometimes they get there before us, but that's not usually the case. So.
It's because you guys are just located nearby at a fire station.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, that's very cool. Like the other thing I definitely wanted to ask you about is your work with Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service, I guess kind of the federal entities that are involved in forestry management, wildfire firefighting. And I know that you were a member of a Hotshot crew, and I don't know if a lot of people know what that is. I did like a little bit of Wikipedia research on it. I know I've known you for a little while. I know you're like a really humble guy, and so you probably won't like pump this up, but it's like kind of the elite, the special forces of the firefighting world. It was really fascinating to read about the little information that I could find on the internet. So how did you get involved in doing that? What was that work like, and what did it consist of?
So I got involved with that after I got out of the Marine Corps in 2009 as a sergeant. Officer candidate school didn't start until September, October.
Okay.
So I had like months off to basically just, to do kind of whatever, And so I had heard about Hotshot crews before, with my time with Cal Fire and Forest Service and all that. I was familiar with them. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna, maybe I'll kind of put in for wildland jobs and all over, and see what comes up, And they had an opening for a person to be on a Hotshot crew in Alaska. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. I think I want to do that. So I was living in Huntington Beach at the time.
Okay.
Southern California. So I applied for it. You have to apply it online. Back then in 2009, it was online. I mean, it still is online, but it was through a job site called USA Jobs, I think. And that's how I applied. And then I got a call back from the supervisor, I think called him superintendent of the Hotshot crew that I applied for in Alaska. And he said, well, obviously I'm not going to have you fly up to Fairbanks to do an interview. So I'll talk to you over the phone.
Right.
And so I talked to him, I kind of sent him my resume and all that. And he liked what I seemed to like what I was all about. And so he hired me. And so like I said, at the time I was living in Huntington Beach. So that was about April. I put all my stuff in storage and drove up to Fairbanks.
Okay.
From basically Huntington Beach.
Nice. All right.
It took about 7 days. The trip itself was an amazing trip.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I went to work for about three and a half months.
Okay.
So the fire seasons up there is kind of short because obviously, by the time it's August, September, it's already snowing.
Right?
Yeah. But what I didn't really realize about Alaska is how much it can burn and actually how hot it can get.
Okay.
And how much they actually do have thunderstorms. They have a lot of wildland, not so much forest because it's kind of a borderline tundra climate, but they do have a lot of what's called BLM land.
Right.
And BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is the biggest landowner in the United States.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the non-forest federal land
Mm-hmm.
is they have jurisdiction over.
So is it the U.S. Forest Service has jurisdiction over all the forests, and
Right.
Bureau of Land Management, basically everything else kind of like
Over the federal forests.
Oh, okay.
Because there's state forests too.
Right.
Which I can kind of get into that a little bit later.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Nevada, for example, has a lot of BLM land.
Right.
Alaska has a lot of BLM land.
Okay.
So I was hired on like a type 1 initial attack or a hotshot crew.
Right.
For Alaska.
So what does that mean? If you like kind of explain to viewers a little bit, what does it mean to be on a hotshot crew? How is it different from, I guess, regular wildland firefighters? How does the work differ?
Work differs because our design is we're more of an initial attack crew, whereas the other ones do more mop up and kind of like work like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we're the ones who are going into a fire, an active fire. We're cutting line around the fire to contain it.
Got it.
We don't do as much mop up, although we do mop up. That's not really kind of our primary purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Our primary purpose is initial attack.
And by mop up, you mean like there's smoking embers and we need to make sure that the fire doesn't like reignite. It's kind of like,
that's right.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we, in Alaska, Alaska is about 250,000 square miles. It's the biggest state geographically in the United States. So there's 2 hotshot crews for the entire state. So we would go all over the place. We would fly to places.
I remember going on a trip to Alaska one time, and I think we drove north for something like 10 or 12 hours. And I thought, we had traversed an enormous amount of the state. And then just looking at the map, it's just like we had barely made a dent. It's just it's an enormous expanse. I think a lot of people don't realize because of the distortions of a regular map, like how big Alaska is. It's just huge. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. So I grew up in the Bay Area. I've been in San Francisco for in the last 10, 11, 12 years. And, I know that there have been significant wildfires in the past. California has a history of wildfires. There were big fires in like 2003 and 2007, 2015, I kind of remember. But the last 4 years, really starting, I think in 2017 is when I just like noticed, wow, there was a huge fire this season. And then just basically every year after that, even 2019, which I think was a smaller fire season, there was still quite a few, hundred thousands of acres burned. Is this like a new phenomenon, or is it just like, I haven't been paying attention? Because it seems now like literally every single year, we're seeing a pretty big constellation of massive fires, both in Northern and Southern California.
Yeah. I think it's going to be a kind of a new phenomenon for a while.
Okay.
And, I would say it's because in a lot of ways, we've kind of oversuppressed for a long time. I think to me, it's kind of a confluence of a lot of factors.
Right.
A lot of people like to blame climate change as the only cause of these wildfires, which I'm not saying it's not part of the reason, but I wouldn't say it's the primary reason. I think there's a lot more stuff going on besides the climate change. I would say it's to do with the oversuppression of fires for the last 100 or so years. We've kind of like had this belief that every fire is a bad fire and we have to put it out immediately. And I think it kind of comes from the reason why we think that is because of a couple different things. The Smokey the Bear thing. Smokey the Bear was an actual cub. That was a real bear that was burned. And it kind of
I shouldn't laugh. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, the bear was fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but it became kind of like the mascot for, this is what fires do to like cute little bears.
Right.
And it kind of tugged at our heartstrings. So, if there's a wildfire, we have to put it out immediately because we don't want cute little cubs to burn up.
Right.
And burn their paws. And then you had the other, there was a fire, I think it was in the 30s or 20s in Griffith Park in LA, where about 20 or so people actually got killed.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was one of the deadliest wildfires before the Camp Fire in history. So what we kind of experienced was fires happening in wildland areas are bad. And we got to put them out immediately because they hurt bears and they kill people. Not really knowing that this has been the history of California for thousands and thousands of years. California burns. That's what it does.
Right.
And we kind of came into this environment not really knowing what we're getting into. So I think as a result, we've kind of over suppressed fires and not let them go through that natural cycle of burning and growing and burning again.
So what does that lead to? I mean, I've also heard, a whole host of explanations. It's funny that you mentioned Smokey Bear, because again, I remember when I was little, the perception was fires are bad, and fires are bad because people start fires, right? It was the idea, the public perception was fires are usually caused by arsonists or irresponsible campers, right? Like only you can prevent forest fires. That was the tagline.
Yeah.
And it sounds like now, at least a big part of it is this sort of forest mismanagement. And so by not allowing fires to burn through, what does that result in? Are we just in like a huge amount of fuel debt now? Is there just a bunch of dead?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I think not only that, but like now we have, we've brought over, you have your native species, your native redwoods and your oaks that grow in like the central part of California and all those trees, and your chaparral and your California sage and your other kinds of manzanita that grow, and those will burn. The redwoods not so much, but the other ones will burn, and they'll kind of go away, but then they'll come back again.
Right.
But they don't ever get into they're not really ever allowed to accumulate enough where it gets so hot that it basically obliterates everything and moonscapes everything. The other thing too is we're kind of introducing a lot more invasive species which aren't really part of the natural ecosystem, and they can add more fuel loading to environments and make it burn even hotter. So for example, a perfect example of that would be the eucalyptus tree. For example, it's actually, per cord of wood, it has one of the highest BTU outputs. So when a eucalyptus tree burns, it puts out, I think, about 35 million BTUs per cord of wood, which is a lot higher than a lot of other natives, trees and plants. Right. So when it burns a lot hotter. So that could be part of it as well. And so you have the fuel loading from not burning regularly. You have the introduction of new species which are not part of the environment, which can add to the fuel loading.
And then burn hotter.
And it burns hotter. And then, you have maybe a little bit of the climate change. It's kind of really tough to say how much hotter or what the difference in temperature is throughout the decades, because we've only been here for such a short amount of time throughout the whole entire California history. Yeah. But and then just the absolute suppression of every fire. We're not letting these plants burn. Right. Add to that, when you have there's also like bugs that kill trees, like the bark beetle, for example. Right. So the bark beetle, it kind of, what keeps it in check is those fires every now and then. Okay. So bark beetles kill trees. Right. That's what they do. They go for the bark, the wood, and they kill the I think what's called a cambium layer of the living part of the tree. And every now and then a fire should be coming through, and it kind of like kills all those bark beetles. But if you don't have that fire, it allows them to proliferate and get bigger and spread out more. And then now you have more dead trees killed by the bark beetle, which adds even more to the fuel loading.
So it sounds like there's kind of a perfect storm going on, right? Like, and a lot of different things can be going on at once. We certainly could, and I'm convinced of the fact that, we have climate change and that's affecting things, but it's, combine that with the lack of proper forest management and just kind of, so,
and only one more thing is now we have people going into these environments, living in these environments. So now we have the human factor, and the PG and the power line factor, the PG&E factor, the Southern California Edison factor too.
Right.
So you have all that stuff, and people kind of, as unpredictable as they are, doing things which can cause even more fires.
So there's a whole ton of things there, and it's a whole ton of factors. They all kind of mix together in this stew, and creates. It's almost like, if we could remove one or two of them, we may not reach the tipping point that we have reached, and just have these fire seasons every year. And I would be very interested in kind of exploring and getting your ideas about which one should we be attacking, right? Like climate change, a big problem, something that we should be doing something about regardless, but at least within the city of San Francisco, even the state of California, there's not really a whole lot that we could do in the near future about that. PG&E's, Edison, it sounds like they're kind of starting to get their act together a little bit, and that's good. And then with the fire suppression stuff, it's not actually. I've heard people say that before, and it seems to be like more and more of the consensus opinion among fire experts. So, and I've heard that mentioned a bunch of times over the last 2 or 3 years. I haven't heard some major announcement from Gavin Newsom or Jerry Brown before him. They're like, okay, Cal Fire is now going to adopt this entirely new policy, and we're going to embark on a more reasonable strategy of allowing fires to burn out. So it sounds like the solution is there. Why can't we implement that? What's preventing the government agencies, either at the state or the federal level, from going ahead and actually allowing these fires to burn through?
Well, I think part of the fear is that because we've allowed the fuels to get so big that now if we let these fires burn, they're going to be kind of hard to control. So that's the fear. And I think too, it's kind of some politics, because if there's a fire, the people, we want to put out, and then we hear about firefighters maybe doing a little bit of a more defensive or non-interventionist approach. It's kind of like, well, what are you doing? You need to be putting this out. Why aren't you putting it out? So not really knowing that sometimes that could be the best policy, you know? And I think people are just, in some ways, still kind of stuck on that all fire is bad philosophy or idea that, we can't let any fire burn, not really realizing that more smaller controlled fires, I think, are a good thing. It kind of clears out all the overgrowth of plants and fuels, and you can actually use fire to fight fire.
Right.
So, like, if you have a fire oncoming towards you, you can actually light a backfire, which burns up to the fire, because the fire is kind of stuck together, and now you actually kind of put the fire out.
So you can't fight fire with fire.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's kind of a hard thing for people to wrap around their heads around, that not all fire is bad.
Right.
And if we were to do a controlled burn here in the city, or even like in Mount San Bruno or some other parts of the Bay Area, people would be like saying, well, why you can't do that? The smoke is bad. You're letting carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. You're just adding to the global warming, not really realizing the long-term benefit from that may actually be the opposite.
Right.
By putting these little fires in the ground, we're actually preventing against a much
massive.
bigger, harder to control fire.
Right.
Yeah. And to be honest, like a lot of the plant life depends on fire. Some pine cones for some pine species, they don't open up unless they reach that critical temperature, which can only be reached by a fire. And some plants, like the California sagebrush, they can get too big, and they can kind of actually die out because they get too big. But if a fire comes through and burns them, it actually kind of rejuvenates them. So
let me throw I guess a problem and a solution at you, because, and maybe repeating back to you some of what you've already said. It sounds like there's kind of like a misalignment of incentives, right? Because if I am a local congressperson or a local state senator or assembly person or the governor, right? I'm only going to be in office for 2 or 4 or 8 years. And so I'm not really thinking about what's good for the health of California or California's forests over many decades. What I'm worried about is whether my constituents are going to complain about the fact that there's a fire happening right now and they're going to have to breathe the smoke. To me, that sounds like a problem that can only be solved then by removing kind of forest and firefighting administration from the local and even state level, and making it something federal, where because we're just not going to, I'll never miss an opportunity to dunk a little bit on Gavin Newsom, but Gavin Newsom is not an incredibly strong governor, and he's not going to be the type of person that's going to stand up to special interests that are telling him, put out all these fires. He's not going to be, Jerry Brown, I thought, got a lot of things wrong, but Jerry Brown, when he thought something was the right thing to do, he would stand up and make it happen. And I don't see Newsom doing that. So maybe this is something that, we really need to federalize fire response and forest management in the United States. Do you think that that's a too crazy idea?
I don't know that could work, because the way that it breaks down for like wildland in California is you have your local responsibility area, which is administered by the cities and counties. You have your state responsibility area, which is administered by the state, and you have your federal responsibility area, which is administered by the feds. Right. So we have such things as state forests in California. Right. State-owned land that we're responsible for. I don't know if federalizing it would solve the problem necessarily. I think it actually might even kind of make it a little bit worse, because what is good for what's right for fire control in Florida is not right for fire control in California. There's different. And so, for example, I think the fire season in Florida is not in summertime. It's more in the spring or the fall, when things are less humid. And dew points are lower. So I don't really see that as the solution, but I do think that it's going to take some education to the public that we kind of need these little smaller fires to control and prevent against the big ones. And the other thing too is we don't always need to use fire. We can use other means of, I've seen goats being used even here in the city.
Right. Yeah. In Berkeley, I remember seeing that.
Yeah. So if that takes away the fuel without the fire, then, so be it. Yeah. That could be another option. The trees are politics in San Francisco, especially the eucalyptus trees in Mount Davidson and Mount Sutro. But, we may have to face the fact that some of them might have to go. Right. Because if you live on streets like Dalewood, which butts up against, one side's all houses and the other side's all thick stands of eucalyptus and ivy. If that whole side of the mountain caught fire, those houses would be toast. Right. Because, if you stand next to a burning tree, the radiant heat is tremendous, and it's like I got to step back like a good amount of ways. It's surprising, Yeah. And the radiant heat from those trees burning alone could catch those houses on fire. So we may have to face the fact that some of those trees may have to go in order to save the properties and prevent against bigger fires and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So there's other ways besides fire to mitigate the fuel, but there's just removing them by physical means.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to kind of look at that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. This has been really fascinating. I'm going to close just with a maybe not so uplifting quote from a ProPublica article, I think underscoring some of the points that you've made tonight. So from the article, academics believe that between 4.4 million and 11.8 million acres burned each year in prehistoric California.
Mm-hmm.
Between 1982 and 1998, California's agency land managers burned on average about 30,000 acres a year. Between 1997 and 2017, that number dropped to an annual 13,000 acres. In February 2020, Nature Sustainability, the journal, published this terrifying conclusion. California would need to burn 20 million acres, an area about the size of Maine, to restabilize in terms of fire. So we've got quite a ways to go.
Yeah, we do. We have to realize where we're living in. California is a wonderful place. I love it here. I'm never going to leave. But it's also a wild place. Our environment is not built for our comfort.
Mm-hmm.
We think it is because we have mild year-round temperatures, but there's a very huge and ever-present wild, uncontrollable aspect to our environment. There's always been that with the earthquakes, and we have a volcano or two here too as well, which people don't really think about.
Idea.
Yeah, that or nearby. I mean, we have stuff going on here, and we're walking into it. We're walking into California, being California,
Right?
And sometimes that is deadly.
Right.
Nature kind of always reigns supreme, even in California, where we've been used to being, having nature be so gentle to us for so long. It's not. Nature
finds a way.
Nature fights back. It finds a way. It's
right.
like Jeff Goldblum said in that Jurassic Park movie. Life finds a way.
Exactly. Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us. This was a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you,
and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.